The vineyards of Napa Valley shimmered under the late afternoon sun, stretching in perfect rows across the rolling hills, each leaf catching the light like a piece of glass. The wedding venue sat in the middle of this lush paradise, a grand estate that looked as though it had been plucked from a European countryside and set down among California's finest vineyards. Inside the hall, crystal chandeliers scattered 1,000 stars of light across the marble floor, while outside the scent of roses and lavender carried on the breeze. Guests moved about in gowns of silk and tailored suits, holding champagne flutes that sparkled in the sun. A quartet of violinists played in the corner, their music weaving a delicate thread of romance through the crowd. It was a scene of opulence, the kind of wedding that appeared in glossy magazines, where every detail shimmered with perfection. At the center of it all stood Celeste Morgan, the bride luminous in a gown of satin and lace that seemed to glow under the chandeliers. Her veil cascaded behind her like a trail of silver light, and her groom, a respected cardiologist, kept her hand firmly in his as the photographers swarmed around them. Celeste laughed radiant, the sound bright and effortless. Friends clustered at her side, whispering how lucky she was, how perfect she looked, how charmed her life had always been. She was as always the twin who dazzled the world. On the far edge of the hall, at a table tucked near the wall, sat Clara Morgan. The resemblance between her and Celeste was uncanny. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same delicate jawline, but where Celeste shone, Clara seemed invisible. She wore a navy dress. She had designed herself elegant and understated. Yet compared to the extravagance swirling around her, it seemed almost too quiet. Clara swirled the last sip of wine in her glass and lifted it to her lips, her smile polite and practiced, though inside she felt the familiar ache of being overlooked. From the next table, 2 women leaned close, their voices pitched just enough to carry. "Celeste is so lucky," one whispered, eyes shining. "Married to a doctor, can you imagine a dream come true?" The other gave a soft laugh. And poor Clara, still single, she must feel awful today. Clara kept her eyes on her glass, letting the words slip over her like a wave she had no strength to fight. It had always been this way. Since childhood, she had been the other twin, the quiet one, the shadow, who walked beside the star. She loved her sister dearly, but comparisons had clung to her like a second skin. Celeste, the radiant, Clara, the reserved. Celeste, the chosen, Clara, the forgotten. She had carved out her own life as an interior designer, pouring herself into a small studio in San Francisco, where she could create beauty on her own terms away from the endless spotlight. Yet tonight, amid the luxury of this wedding, that independence seemed small, fragile, against the roar of admiration directed toward her sister. The contrast pressed harder as the evening unfolded. On the dance floor, Celeste tossed her bouquet into a circle of eager bridesmaids, their laughter ringing through the hall. Clara stayed seated, her fingers curling around her glass, praying no one would drag her forward. When the bouquet was caught by a squealing cousin, applause erupted. Clara forced a smile, but the hollow weight in her chest only grew heavier. She glanced at her phone beneath the table, checking the time. Barely 8 o'clock. Far too early to escape. The violinists shifted into a waltz, and couples streamed onto the polished floor. Clara watched as silk skirts twirled and black shoes glided the scene, a blur of harmony and romance. Her heart tightened. She imagined the whispers that might circle even now. Look at her still alone, the twin without a partner, the one who never quite measured up. She pressed her palm to the tablecloth, grounding herself. She would not cry at her sister's wedding. Not here, not tonight. The scent of cologne brushed past her, sharp and unexpected. She lifted her eyes, expecting another guest searching for a seat. Instead, she found herself staring at a man whose presence seemed to silence the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit so perfectly cut it carried the weight of power. His hair was dark, his features sharp, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, steel gray and unwavering, that made people stop mid-conversation. Heads turned. A ripple of awareness spread outward, as if the air itself had shifted. Clara blinked, startled. The man paused only a moment, then pulled out the empty chair beside her and sat with deliberate calm, as though it had always been his place. She opened her mouth to protest, but before a word formed, he leaned closer, his voice low and smooth, brushing her ear like a secret. "Pretend you are with me." Clara froze, her pulse stumbling. She turned, meeting those gray eyes, the intensity of his gaze, making her breath catch. "Excuse me," she whispered, uncertain if she had heard correctly. He did not look at her. His eyes stayed fixed across the room toward a small group of guests who had paused to watch. "They are staring," he murmured. "If you do not mind, let us make them believe." The whispers had already begun. The forgotten twin was no longer alone. A mysterious stranger had claimed the seat beside her, and curiosity surged like fire through the crowd. Clara felt heat flood her cheeks. In one breath, a man she did not know had rewritten her place in the story. She did not know his name or his reasons, only that her solitude had ended in an instant. She hesitated, her heart pounding, torn between disbelief and a strange flicker of anticipation. Slowly, almost against her will, she gave the smallest of nods. The man leaned back, one arm resting casually on the table, his presence so natural it seemed inevitable. Around them, the murmurs grew speculation, buzzing in the air. Clara gripped her glass, her fingers trembling, realizing with sudden clarity that nothing about this night would ever be the same. The man who had settled beside Clara carried with him an aura that demanded attention. Even without a formal introduction, the murmurs of recognition spread quickly across the tables. Damien Hale. His name whispered through the air like a current, passing from one guest to another, until nearly everyone in the hall seemed to know who he was. Damien Hale, the billionaire who had built an empire in artificial intelligence and robotics. The man whose inventions were said to be reshaping industries. The elusive figure who rarely appeared at public gatherings unless compelled. The best man leaned toward another guest, his voice low but still audible. "That is Damien, a friend of the groom from his university days. No one sees him at these events. Why is he sitting with the bride's sister?" The ripple of intrigue only sharpened the spotlight already burning on Clara. She shifted in her seat, her heart racing, caught between awe and panic. Damien himself appeared untouched by the attention. He sat with a posture that radiated control, his gaze cool and detached, as though he had calculated every angle of the room and filed it neatly in his mind. The faint gleam of his cufflinks caught the chandelier light, subtle yet deliberate. His presence was not loud, not flamboyant. It was the kind of quiet authority that came from someone who never needed to prove his power because the world already knew. Clara struggled to steady her breath. She had seen his face before on magazine covers headlines about his billion-dollar acquisitions and his philanthropic projects, but nothing had prepared her for the force of him up close. His proximity felt overwhelming, as if the air itself had tightened. She whispered cautiously, "Why me?" His lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, though his eyes never left the distant group still watching. "Because you look like you needed saving as much as I did." Clara blinked, confusion threading through her chest. She wanted to ask more, but Damien was already lifting her glass, filling it with fresh wine as though it were the most natural gesture in the world. A couple nearby gasped softly, watching the way he leaned in close, the way his movements suggested familiarity. Clara felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. It was as though the hall had divided itself in two. Celeste, with her perfect wedding, and Clara suddenly thrust into a role she had never auditioned for, sitting beside the billionaire everyone wanted to understand. Damien's voice was low, steady, meant only for her. "Do not look so alarmed. Pretend you know me. Pretend you are not sitting alone." His words struck something in her chest, a mixture of irritation and reluctant relief. For years she had grown used to invisibility, but tonight invisibility had been unbearable. Now, without warning, a stranger had turned her into the center of the storm. She managed a whisper. "And what do you get out of this little act?" Damien finally shifted his gaze toward her. The impact was immediate, like being seen for the first time in a way that pierced through all defenses. His gray eyes were sharp, unwavering, but there was a flicker beneath the surface, something guarded yet vulnerable. "Distraction," he said simply. "There are people here trying to arrange things I do not want. You save me, I save you. Mutual benefit." Clara nearly laughed, though it came out more as a shaky breath. "So you just walk up to a stranger and announce we are together. It worked, did it not?" His answer was calm, almost amused, and the corner of his mouth lifted as though he knew exactly how reckless he sounded. Clara wanted to protest, to tell him that none of this made sense, but the looks on the faces around them silenced her. The whispers had shifted. No longer was she the forgotten twin. Now she was the woman at Damien Hale's side, the one everyone envied and speculated about. Her cheeks burned, though, whether from embarrassment or something deeper, she could not say. Damien stood suddenly, his chair sliding back without haste. He extended his hand toward her palm, open, an invitation as bold as it was inescapable. "Dance with me," he said. Clara's breath caught. "I do not dance," she muttered quickly. "You do tonight." The firmness of his tone allowed no argument. Against her better judgment, she placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, warm, grounding in a way that startled her. He led her onto the dance floor where couples parted slightly, to make space, curiosity lighting their faces. The violin swelled into a waltz. Clara stumbled, at first her steps clumsy, but Damien's hand at her waist guided her effortlessly. He moved with the kind of ease that came from absolute confidence, every turn precise, every motion measured. Clara's pulse raced as she tried to keep up, her body tense, her mind screaming that she had no business dancing in front of all these people, especially not with him. Yet Damien leaned down, his voice brushing her ear like velvet. "Relax. They are watching. Let them see what they want to see." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She forced her shoulders to loosen, her steps to follow his lead. Slowly, almost miraculously, the movements began to flow. The music lifted them, the room fading until all she could focus on was the steady rhythm of his hand guiding her, and the way his gaze anchored hers. Around them, the whispers turned to admiration. Some guests smiled, others exchanged knowing looks, but no one doubted what they saw. Clara Morgan, the overlooked twin, dancing in the arms of Damien Hale, as though she belonged there. When the music slowed, Damien did not release her immediately. He leaned closer, his lips near her ear. "See you soon, Clara Morgan." Her heart jolted at the sound of her name on his lips. Before she could respond, he released her hand, bowed his head slightly, and stepped away with the same calm decisiveness with which he had arrived. The crowd parted for him as though pulled by an unseen force. Clara stood in the center of the floor, breathless, her pulse still racing, her mind struggling to piece together what had just happened. Guests whispered all around her, but she no longer heard their words. Only one thought pulsed in her mind. Her life had shifted in a single evening, and the stranger who had whispered, "Pretend you are with me," was walking out of the hall, leaving her with questions she could not yet answer. Clara returned to her table, her heart still racing, the echo of Damien's words clinging to her like the faint perfume of his cologne. She sank into her chair, her mind spinning, but the room had already reshaped around her. The stares that once carried pity now brimmed with speculation. The whispers that had stung minutes earlier had transformed into murmurs of admiration and envy. "Did you see the way he looked at her?" one guest hissed to another. Damien Hale, of all people, and with Clara Morgan. Clara kept her chin high, pretending to sip her wine, though her hands trembled slightly. She had not agreed to this performance yet. Here she was thrust onto a stage she never imagined. Damien returned to her side, his expression unreadable, as though nothing unusual had happened. He leaned back in his chair, one arm resting casually across the back of hers, the gesture intimate, deliberate. The women at the next table gasped softly, covering their mouths. Clara stiffened at the warmth of his arm behind her, her instincts screaming that this was too close, too real. "What are you doing?" she whispered under her breath. Convincing them, he replied simply, his voice smooth, steady, without a trace of apology. "And you, Clara Morgan, are doing better than I expected." Clara turned slightly, meeting his gaze. Those gray eyes carried no hesitation, only calculation. Yet there was a flicker there she could not name. "I did not agree to this little theater," she muttered, but her words lacked conviction. Damien lifted his glass and poured more wine into hers, the gesture so practiced it looked like second nature. To anyone watching it was an image of effortless companionship. To Clara, it felt like a line she had crossed without realizing. Guests began to drift toward their table, drawn like moths to the sudden flame. The groom's colleagues, investors, acquaintances, they all wanted to greet Damien, to exchange words with him, and by extension, to meet the woman at his side. Damien rose to his feet, each time polite but distant, introducing Clara, as if the title were natural. "This is Clara Morgan," he said evenly. "She is someone very important to me." Clara nearly choked on her wine, but the guests beamed delighted by the revelation. Compliments flowed like champagne. "What a beautiful couple," one woman gushed. "I had no idea Damien was seeing someone. You kept that very secret." Clara forced a smile, her cheeks burning. "We value our privacy," she managed, hoping her voice did not tremble. Damien glanced at her with the faintest curve of his lips, a spark of amusement hidden beneath the steel. His composure was flawless, his timing perfect, and whenever she faltered, he slipped seamlessly into the role, saving her with a well-placed comment or a diversion that shifted attention. At one point, when a guest pressed too eagerly about how long they had been together, Clara hesitated. Damien slid his hand over hers on the table, his thumb brushing her knuckles, in a gesture so natural it startled her. Long enough, he said softly, his eyes locked with hers in a way that made her pulse stumble. The guest laughed charmed and moved on. Clara snatched her hand back the moment they were gone, glaring at him. "You are far too good at this," she whispered. "Who said I was pretending?" The simple question knocked the air from her lungs. Before she could reply, Damien stood again, offering his hand to her. "Come," he said. "They expect us to dance again." Clara shook her head quickly. Once was more than enough, but his hand remained extended, steady, commanding. The eyes of the room were on them waiting. Clara sighed, placed her hand in his, and let herself be led back to the floor. This time she did not stumble. Damien's lead was confident, certain pulling her into rhythm until her body began to trust the movement. For a moment the chatter of the crowd faded, the chandeliers blurred into golden haze. It was just the two of them, the music and the strange current that flowed between them, charged and unspoken. When the song ended, Damien bowed his head slightly, his lips near her ear. "Well done." The words sent warmth rushing to her cheeks, though she quickly looked away. They returned to their table, but the performance did not end there. Every detail seemed choreographed by Damien's invisible hand. When Clara's laugh faltered, he leaned in with a quiet joke that steadied her. When her confidence waned under curious stares, he shifted the conversation with ease. It was as though he had studied every angle of this charade and knew exactly how to sustain it. Clara found herself swept along, playing her part with surprising ease. The evening wore on, toasts were made, the cake was cut. Celeste and her groom danced their first dance while cameras flashed. Clara sat at Damien's side, her mind caught between disbelief and reluctant fascination. She had come prepared to endure an evening of invisibility, but instead she had been thrust into the brightest light of all. At one point Celeste approached their table, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Clara," she said warmly, though her tone carried a thread of disbelief, "I did not know you were bringing someone." Clara's mouth opened, but Damien spoke first. "She did not need to announce it," he said smoothly. "We prefer to keep things quiet." Celeste blinked, studying him for a moment, then glanced back at Clara with a knowing smile. "Well," she said softly, "I am glad you are not alone tonight." Clara's cheeks flushed, her throat tight. She wanted to confess the truth, to tell her sister this was nothing but a farce, but Damien's steady presence silenced her. Celeste left her veil trailing behind her, and Clara exhaled sharply. "You are going to make me look like a liar in front of my own family," she hissed. Damien's gaze softened just slightly. "No, I am making them believe in you." The words lingered, unsettling her in ways she could not name. As the night drew to a close, fireworks lit up the vineyard sky, their colors reflecting in the glasses and chandeliers. Clara stood at the edge of the terrace, watching them, her heart heavy with contradictions. Damien stepped beside her, his silhouette outlined against the bursts of light. "This was unexpected," she admitted softly, almost to herself. "For both of us," he said. He turned, then his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath falter. But remember this, Clara Morgan. Tonight was only the beginning. With that, he bowed his head slightly, then walked away, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the estate. Clara stood frozen, the sound of fireworks echoing overhead, her heart thundering as if it already knew that nothing in her life would ever return to the way it had been. 1 week later, Clara was back in San Francisco in the modest studio she had built from nothing. Rolls of fabric leaned against the walls, sketches lay scattered across her drafting table, and the faint scent of coffee clung to the air. She had buried herself in work, convincing herself that the strange interlude at her sister's wedding had been just that, an interlude, a fleeting moment that would dissolve into memory. Yet when the knock sounded at her door and she looked up to see Damien Hale standing there in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in her cramped studio, she realized the past week had only been the prologue. He did not waste time on pleasantries. He stepped inside his presence, filling the small space, his gaze sweeping across the sketches before settling on her. "I need your help," he said yavinly. Clara folded her arms, wary. "Help with what exactly?" "Designing your penthouse." Damien's lips curved faintly, but his eyes remained serious. "Continue what you started at the wedding. Pretend to be my partner." Clara laughed, the sound sharp, incredulous. "You cannot be serious. That was one night. A ridiculous performance." "And it worked," Damien countered smoothly. The attention shifted. The questions stopped. "You saved me from arrangements I did not want." Clara shook her head. "So this is your solution?" "Hire a stranger to play your girlfriend, not hire Damien," corrected his voice steady. "Ask, I do not trust easily. But I trusted you that night, and it worked better than I expected." Clara's pulse quickened at the weight of his words, though she masked it with a skeptical smile. "Why me?" "Because you are intelligent," he replied without hesitation, "strong enough to withstand scrutiny. And you are not dazzled by me, which makes you believable." Clara stared at him, searching for cracks in his calm facade. "You realize how absurd this sounds. I have a life, a career. I cannot just drop everything to play a part in your story." Damien took a step closer, his presence overwhelming in the small studio. "I am not asking you to drop everything. I am asking you to stand beside me when necessary. Public events, galas, situations where eyes are watching. In return, you gain access to a world that could benefit your work, connections, clients, opportunities you would never reach alone." The logic stung because it was true. Clara thought of the high-profile design firms that dominated the city, the wealthy clients she dreamed of landing. She imagined her sketches brought to life in spaces far grander than her tiny studio. Damien was offering a doorway, but still her pride flared. "So I trade my dignity for exposure." His gray eyes flickered with something sharp, then softened just enough to surprise her. "Not dignity, partnership. You set your terms." Clara hesitated, the silence stretching. Part of her wanted to laugh him out the door. Another part whispered that this was fate knocking. She had always been the overlooked twin, but here was a chance to step into a role no one could ignore. Slowly she exhaled. "All right, here are my conditions. I can walk away whenever I choose. No questions asked." Damien inclined his head, accepting without hesitation. "Agreed." And Clara added firmly, "I will not be treated like a prop. If I am to do this, it is on equal footing." His lips curved faintly, almost approving. "Of course, I would not want a prop. I want someone who can match me." Clara's chest tightened at the way he said it, steady and deliberate, as though he had already calculated the truth of it. She looked down at her sketches, her hands restless, then met his gaze again. Fine. Temporary. That is all this is. Damien extended his hand, the gesture formal, sealing the unspoken contract. Clara hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, steady, the kind of hold that suggested permanence, even when the words denied it. Temporary, she repeated, her voice quieter than she intended. Damien's eyes locked with hers. For now, he said softly. She withdrew her hand quickly, needing space, needing air. So what happens next? Damien glanced at his watch with calm precision. Next weekend, a charity gala in San Francisco. Be ready. With that, he turned toward the door, leaving her studio as swiftly as he had entered. Clara stood in the silence he left behind, her pulse hammering, her mind a storm. She had agreed to a game she did not fully understand, a role that promised both opportunity and danger. And as the door clicked shut, she whispered to herself, "What have you just done?" Clara Morgan. The black Bentley pulled up in front of Clara's apartment building the following Saturday evening, its polished frame gleaming beneath the streetlights. Neighbors peered through their blinds as the driver stepped out, opening the rear door with precise formality. Clara smoothed the simple black dress she had chosen, her heart thudding. She had never been to a gala before, let alone one hosted in one of San Francisco's most prestigious art museums. As she slid into the car, she caught sight of Damien, already seated. His suit perfectly tailored, his silver tie catching the glow of the city outside. He looked at her with a quick appraisal that felt like an X-ray, then gave a brief nod. "You clean up well." Clara narrowed her eyes. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" His lips curved faintly. "It is an observation." The car glided toward the museum, the city lights flickering past. Clara tried to steady herself, repeating silently that this was just a performance, nothing more. But as they stepped out onto the red carpet, cameras flashing whispers. Rising, the weight of it hit her. Every eye seemed to follow Damien, and by extension her. She felt exposed, fragile, yet Damien's hand on her back was firm, anchoring her. Inside, the museum glittered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung high above marble floors, and walls lined with priceless art framed the elite of San Francisco as they mingled in gowns and tuxedos. Waiters moved like shadows, carrying trays of champagne. Clara accepted a glass, but her nerves betrayed her. The stem slipped slightly in her grasp, causing the liquid to slosh over the rim. A woman nearby snickered, whispering, "She looks out of place." Heat rushed to Clara's face, her throat tightening. Before she could retreat, Damien leaned in, his voice low, but carrying enough for others to hear. "Careful," he said smoothly. "You are trying to outshine the champagne." A ripple of laughter moved through the group, but it was warm now, amused rather than mocking. Clara blinked, startled, as Damien lifted her hand and steadied the glass himself. The tension broke, and even the snickering woman chuckled, disarmed by his ease. Clara's pulse slowed, a reluctant gratitude blooming in her chest. "You are infuriating," she muttered when the crowd's attention shifted. Damien glanced at her sidelong. "And yet you are still here." The night unfolded like a performance choreographed by unseen strings. Damien introduced her to investors, philanthropists, and politicians, his hand occasionally brushing hers as if to remind her of their shared script. Each time Clara faltered, he covered seamlessly. Each time the spotlight burned too hot, he absorbed it, shielding her. Yet she also noticed the undercurrent, his gaze scanning the room constantly. His smile polite, but never careless. He was always calculating, always aware. Hours later, as the gala ended, Clara collapsed into the Bentley's leather seat, kicking off her heels with a sigh. Do people actually enjoy those things? Damien adjusted his cufflinks. Some do. I endure them. Clara shook her head, laughing softly. Well, you endure them very convincingly. For a brief second, his eyes flickered, and she thought she saw a trace of softness beneath the steel. The next morning, Clara expected her life to return to normal. But Damien appeared at her studio unannounced, dressed down in a casual jacket and jeans that somehow still looked impossibly expensive. He leaned against the doorway, holding 2 grocery bags. You skipped breakfast, he said flatly. Clara blinked. How would you even know that he stepped inside, ignoring her protest? Come on, you need food, and I need a lesson in the real world. An hour later, they were in a crowded neighborhood supermarket, pushing a squeaky cart down an aisle stacked with cereal boxes. Damien inspected them like foreign artifacts, frosted flakes, he read aloud. Is this considered food or sugar disguised as food? Clara laughed so suddenly she startled herself. Both, she said. If you want something classic, go with Cheerios. He placed the box in the cart with exaggerated care. Noted. Functional, not flashy. That is your life philosophy, isn't it? She teased. He shot her a look that was half amused, half unreadable. You think you have me figured out? Not even close, she admitted, smiling despite herself. They moved through the aisles, arguing playfully over which pasta brand was best, whether canned soup counted as cooking, and which coffee blend tasted less like burnt wood. Damien carried the bags out himself, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by who recognized him. Back at her apartment, they cooked together in her tiny kitchen. Clara stirred sauce, while Damien's sleeves rolled up chopped vegetables with surprising precision. He looked strangely out of place among her chipped mugs and second-hand stove. Yet at the same time he seemed more at ease than he had at the gala. You are not half bad at this, Clara admitted. Damien raised an eyebrow. I am a quick learner. She handed him a spoon to taste the sauce, and when his expression softened, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. For a moment, the billionaire and the designer were simply 2 people sharing a meal, laughter filling the air. That contrast struck Clara deeply, the luxury of chandeliers and gala halls on one side, the simplicity of cereal aisles and home-cooked pasta on the other. And somehow Damien fit into both worlds with equal ease. Later that night, as she cleared the dishes, Clara caught herself smiling without reason. She shook her head, chastising herself. This was supposed to be temporary, a game of appearances. Yet the line between pretense and reality was blurring, and she could no longer tell which moments were part of the performance and which belonged only to them. The next event arrived sooner than Clara expected. A week after their grocery store adventure, Damien escorted her to a networking dinner hosted in one of San Francisco's tallest skyscrapers. The glass windows, reflecting the entire city, lit up beneath a velvet sky. Inside the room buzzed with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. It was a gathering of power venture capitalists, tech moguls, and government officials. Clara wore a deep emerald dress that contrasted with her dark hair, borrowed from Celeste's closet, but tailored slightly by her own hands. Damien, in his usual flawless suit, guided her into the crowd with his steady hand at her back. The performance began once more. Guests flocked to them, eager to greet Damien, curious about the mysterious woman by his side. Clara smiled, nodded, answered polite questions, all the while reminding herself this was temporary. Just play the part. Yet as the evening wore on, she noticed something that unsettled her. A name drifted into conversations more than once: Victor Cross. Clara had never met him, but she quickly gathered that he was Damien's second in command at Hale Technologies, a man whose reputation for sharp deals and cold efficiency rivaled Damien's. Twice Clara overheard snippets that made her heart race. Near the bar, two men lowered their voices as she pretended to study the hors d'oeuvres. "Cross is moving money offshore," one said. "If anyone digs too deep, it'll explode." The other replied grimly, "As long as Damien signs off, no one questions it." Clara's chest tightened. "Offshore accounts, Kwai Jen." The words rang in her head with alarm bells. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, but the implication was clear. Someone in Damien's orbit was involved in something dangerous. Later that night, as Damien stepped aside to speak with a senator, Clara wandered to the edge of the room, needing space to breathe. She found herself standing before a grand piano in the corner, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. The sight of it tugged something inside her. When Damien returned minutes later, he followed her gaze. For the first time, his cool composure softened. "My mother used to play," he said quietly. Clara turned, surprised. Damien rarely offered anything personal. She was a pianist. He nodded. She believed music could teach patience. "She tried to pass it to me, but I was too stubborn. She died when I was 17. His eyes darkened, the gray stormy with memory. Clara felt her breath catch. She had expected numbers and strategies from him, not grief and loss. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I did not know." "Few people do," Damien replied. His gaze lingered on the piano, distant. "After she died, my father pushed me harder. He thought feelings were weaknesses. To him, success was survival. I suppose I became exactly what he wanted." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with vulnerability. Clara's heart ached at the thought of a boy who had lost his mother, hardened by a father who demanded perfection. This glimpse behind the steel facade unsettled her. It was easier to play her role when he was only a billionaire with sharp edges. But now she saw a man carrying scars, and something inside her wanted to reach for him. She reminded herself sharply that she was here for a performance, not for the truth of him. Yet the lines blurred more with every word he shared. As the evening wound down, Clara excused herself to the restroom. On her way back, she paused near a small group of men, one of whom she recognized from earlier conversations. They were speaking in hushed tones, unaware of her approach. "Cross has it under control," one said. "The accounts in the Caymans are secure. Even if anyone asks, the signatures will point to Hale." Clara froze, her blood running cold. Signatures, Caymans. It was worse than she feared. They were speaking of money laundering, and worse, they were framing Damien. She backed away, heart hammering, and nearly collided with a waiter carrying champagne. The glasses clinked loudly, drawing attention. When she turned, Damien was already there, his eyes sharp, reading her expression. "What happened?" he asked in a low voice. Clara shook her head quickly. "Nothing, just clumsy." His gaze narrowed as though he sensed the lie, but he did not press further. Instead, he guided her out of the room, his hand steady on her waist. On the drive home, Clara stared out the window, her thoughts tangled. She wanted to believe Damien was innocent, that the man who told her about his mother could not be capable of corruption. Yet the whispers echoed in her ears, gnawing at her. Could he truly be part of it? Could his signature be the one approving everything? Damien's voice broke into her thoughts. "You are quiet tonight." She forced a smile, turning just enough to meet his gaze. "Just tired." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, leaning back into his seat. Clara's chest ached. She had promised herself she would not get lost in this act, that she would keep her boundaries clear. But the truth was, she was caught between two worlds. Her heart whispered that Damien was not the villain. Her mind warned her not to be naive. Later that night, back in her apartment, Clara sat at her desk, staring at the sketches she had abandoned earlier. She tried to lose herself in lines and colors, but her hand trembled too much to draw. Instead, she opened her laptop, searching news archives for any mention of Victor Cross, any hint of financial scandals. There were whispers, rumors, nothing concrete. She closed the screen, pressing her hands over her face. This was dangerous, and yet she could not walk away. She remembered the way Damien had looked at the piano, the way his voice softened when he spoke of his mother. That was not the face of a man consumed by greed. It was the face of someone human, someone fragile beneath the armor. The contradiction tore at her. When she finally collapsed into bed, sleep refused to come. She lay in the dark, the city lights flickering through her window, and whispered to herself, "Do not fall for him, Clara. Do not forget why you are here." But deep down she knew it was already too late. The storm broke on a Monday morning. Clara arrived at her studio early, hoping to lose herself in work, but before she could unlock the door, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She froze as she read the headline, "Damien Hale implicated in offshore money laundering scandal. Documents reveal signature on transfers to Cayman accounts." Her stomach dropped. The article displayed a blurred scan of a document Damien's name, scrawled in bold, decisive strokes at the bottom. Clara's hands trembled. It was exactly what she had overheard whispered about. The evidence was there for the world to see. Yet part of her screamed that it could not be true. Not the man who had told her about his mother. Not the man who steadied her hand when she faltered. She told herself she needed answers, real ones, not rumors or leaks. That evening, she found herself in Hale Technologies' glass tower downtown, a place she had only glimpsed from the outside. The lobby gleamed with polished marble, and employees hurried past in sleek suits, their expressions sharp. She moved like a shadow, slipping through hallways, her pulse pounding. She found herself outside a restricted records room. The lock was electronic, but an assistant had left the door ajar minutes earlier. Clara slipped inside. The room smelled of paper and ink, rows of files lining the shelves. She moved quickly, scanning, until she found a folder marked BLC Holdings. Her fingers shook as she pulled it open. Inside were transfer orders, offshore account details, all bearing Damien's signature. Clara's throat tightened. If this was real, then Damien was guilty. But why did it feel like a trap? Before she could decide, a voice cut through the silence. "What are you doing here?" Clara spun around the folder, still in her hands. Damien stood in the doorway, his figure filling the frame, his expression thunderous. His gray eyes burned, not with their usual cool control, but with raw fury. Clara stammered. I needed to know. His voice was low, ragged with anger. Know what? Whether the man you've been pretending to stand beside is a criminal. Clara's chest heaved. I heard whispers, Damien. Offshore accounts, your name on documents. I could not ignore it. He strode forward, snatching the folder from her hands, slamming it shut. So you decided to snoop through my company like a reporter chasing headlines. His words cut deep because they weren't far from the truth. Clara's background as a journalist before she pursued design flashed through her mind. She had sworn she left that part of her life behind, yet here she was again, digging, questioning. She forced herself to meet his gaze. Tell me it is not true. Tell me you are not part of this. For the first time since she had met him, Damien's composure cracked. His jaw clenched, his chest rising sharply with each breath. You came into my life under false pretenses, he hissed. You let me believe you were different. And all the while you were watching, waiting for me to slip. Clara's eyes burned. No, Damien, it did not start that way. I was only curious, suspicious maybe, but then what he demanded. You decided to fall in love with your story. The words landed like a blow. Clara's throat closed, but she forced the truth out anyway. I did not mean to. I never planned it, but I care for you. I needed to know if you were worth trusting with my heart. His laugh was sharp, bitter. You think I asked for your heart? All I needed was a partner who could play a role. And you, his voice cracked slightly, before he caught himself still. Hardening once more, you have turned it into betrayal. Clara shook her head violently, tears threatening. Damien, please, I was trying to protect both of us. If someone is setting you up, if Victor. His face darkened at the name. Enough, I do not want to hear another excuse. His hand tightened around the folder, his knuckles white. It is over, Clara. Whatever this was, whatever you thought it could be, it ends now. Do not ever come near me again. The finality in his tone shattered her. He walked past her, his cologne sharp, his steps echoing like thunder down the hall. Clara stood frozen in the records room, her chest caving inward, her hands trembling. She wanted to scream after him, to tell him she believed in him, despite the documents, despite the whispers. But her voice failed her. Hours later, Clara sat in her apartment, the city lights glowing through the window. She stared at the sketches on her desk, unable to lift a pencil. The memory of his voice replayed over and over. It is over. Do not ever come near me again. She pressed her fists to her eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway, hot and relentless. She had lost him, not just the role, but the man beneath the role, the man she had begun to love against all reason. The next day the newspapers were merciless. Headlines branded Damien as a cold-blooded mogul caught in scandal. Stock prices plummeted. Investors withdrew. Clara read every word, her chest twisting tighter. Her rational mind told her this was justice, that evidence was evidence. Yet her heart whispered that something was wrong, that the man who once shared his mother's memory could not be guilty. She tried to bury herself in work, but clients canceled, afraid of the association. Whispers followed her even in grocery aisles. That's her, Damien Hale's girlfriend. Clara corrected them silently in her head, former girlfriend. Pretend girlfriend. But the sting remained. One evening Celeste called, her voice laced with concern. Clara, I saw the news. Are you all right? Clara swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened. I'm fine, she lied. Celeste hesitated. You don't sound fine. Did you love him? The question cut too close, Clara whispered. I don't know before ending the call. That night she sat by her window, watching the fog roll over the bay, her heart aching. She whispered to the empty room, Damien, I wanted to believe you. I still do. But silence answered her. Across the city, Damien sat alone in his penthouse office, staring out at the skyline, his jaw clenched. His world was unraveling, and the one person he had let into it had betrayed his trust. He told himself he did not care, that Clara's tears meant nothing, that her presence had been a mistake from the start. But when he closed his eyes, all he saw was her face on the dance floor, the way her hand had fit in his, the way her laughter had cut through the static of his life. He cursed under his breath, gripping the glass of scotch in his hand until it threatened to shatter. Trust was a luxury he could not afford. And yet losing her felt like the only thing he could not survive. Days blurred into one another after Damien cut her off, but Clara could not quiet the nagging sense that the puzzle was incomplete. The signatures, the whispers, the offshore accounts, none of it fit with the man she had come to know in stolen moments between galas and grocery aisles. Every instinct told her that someone else was pulling the strings. She began to dig quietly, reaching out to contacts from her former life, as a journalist piecing together fragments of financial reports and insider gossip. Each trail circled back to the same name, Victor Cross. The more she uncovered, the more certain she became that Victor had orchestrated everything. But before she could bring her findings to Damien, the danger reached her first. It was late one evening when Clara left her studio, locking the door behind her. The street was unusually quiet, the air thick with fog. She quickened her steps, clutching her bag, when the screech of tires shattered the silence. A black SUV pulled up alongside her, doors swinging open. Men in dark clothing spilled out, their movements sharp and deliberate. Miss Morgan, one said coldly, "You've been asking too many questions." Panic surged through her chest. She turned to run, but strong arms seized her, dragging her toward the vehicle. She struggled, kicking, screaming, but the fog swallowed her cries. Within seconds she was shoved inside, the door slamming shut. The SUV roared into the night. They blindfolded her, binding her wrists, the leather biting into her skin. Fear coiled tight in her throat as she listened to their muffled voices. "Victor wants it finished tonight," one muttered. Her blood ran cold. Victor, he was behind it all. They drove for what felt like hours until the vehicle lurched to a stop. Rough hands dragged her out, pushing her across gravel, until she stumbled into a warehouse that reeked of oil and rust. The blindfold was ripped away, and she blinked against the harsh light. Victor Cross stood before her, immaculate in a gray suit, his smile sharp and cruel. "Clara Morgan," he drawled. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing." Clara's heart pounded, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You set him up," she said, her voice steady. Despite the fear clawing at her, "you framed Damien." Victor chuckled, slow and mocking. "Framed? No, my dear, I liberated him. He built the empire, I ensured it grew. He was too sentimental, too concerned with morality. He would never have signed those papers willingly, so I made sure he did. A forgery here, a falsified record there, and suddenly the king looks like the criminal." Rage burned in Clara's chest, but Victor leaned closer, his eyes cold. "And now you know too much, which means you won't be leaving this place." He turned to his men. "Make it clean." Clara's breath hitched. She pulled against the bindings, desperate when the crash of boots on gravel cut through the tension. Shouts erupted, the heavy slam of doors. A voice rang out sharp and commanding, "Stand down." Clara's heart jolted. She knew that voice. Damien strode into the warehouse, flanked by a team of private security. Their weapons raised their precision, terrifying. He looked every inch the commander of an empire, his gray eyes burning with fury, his suit dark against the harsh light. Victor's men scrambled, but Damien's team moved faster, disarming them with brutal efficiency. Chaos exploded, grunts, shouts, the crack of fists against flesh. In the middle of it all, Damien pushed forward, his gaze locked on Clara. "Untie her," he barked, and one of his men cut through the ropes. Clara stumbled free, her wrists raw, and before she could fall, Damien's arms were around her, pulling her against him. For one brief, shattering moment, the world disappeared. All she felt was the solidity of him, the way his body shielded hers. "You came," she whispered, her voice breaking. His jaw tightened, his breath ragged against her ear. "Did you really think I would let them take you?" A gunshot cracked through the air. Clara screamed as Damien twisted, shoving her behind him. The bullet grazed his arm, tearing through the fabric of his suit. He barely flinched, his focus locked on Victor, who stood at the far end of the warehouse, a pistol smoking in his hand. Always the hero, Damien, Victor sneered. "Too bad you won't live long enough to see me take everything you built." But before Victor could fire again, Damien's security team closed in, tackling him to the ground, wrenching the weapon from his grip. Shouts echoed the struggle, brief but decisive. Within moments, Victor Cross was pinned, his face twisted in rage. Damien pressed a hand to his bleeding arm, but his gaze never left Clara. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head quickly, tears spilling. "No, but you—" "It's nothing," he said firmly, though his voice softened as his thumb brushed her cheek. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." Clara clutched his sleeve, her chest heaving. "Why, after everything I did, after you told me it was over, why would you come for me?" For the first time, Damien's composure cracked, his voice raw. "Because I could not lose you, not to him, not to anyone." The words broke something inside her. She buried her face against his chest, sobs shaking her. Around them, Victor was dragged away in handcuffs, cursing Damien's name, but Clara barely heard. All she felt was Damien's arms around her, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, the truth undeniable. He had not abandoned her. He had risked everything to save her. As the security team secured the warehouse, Damien guided Clara outside into the cool night air. Sirens wailed in the distance, but his focus never wavered from her. He brushed her hair back from her face, his touch lingering. "It's over," he murmured. Clara looked up at him, her tears glistening in the moonlight. "No," she whispered. "This is just the beginning." For the first time since she had met him, Damien smiled a real smile, not the practiced mask of a billionaire. And in that moment, Clara knew that no matter what lay ahead, the line between pretending and reality had vanished forever. The headlines shifted within days. Where once Damien's name had been dragged through the mud, now it blazed across screens as the man vindicated, Victor Cross arrested in money laundering scheme. Damien Hale cleared of all charges. Photographs showed Victor being led away. In handcuffs, his face twisted with fury, while Damien, though bandaged at the arm, stood before reporters with calm dignity. Clara read the articles with trembling hands, relief flooding her chest, but nothing compared to the moment she walked into the hospital room where Damien was recovering. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air machines humming softly. Damien sat on the bed, his suit jacket discarded his arm, wrapped in fresh bandages. Even injured, he looked powerful, but his eyes softened the moment they found hers. Clara hovered at the doorway, unsure. After everything, after their fracture, did she even have the right to be here? But Damien lifted his uninjured hand, beckoning her closer. Clara. Her breath caught. She crossed the room slowly, her heart pounding, and sank into the chair beside his bed. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Damien reached out his fingers, brushing hers with a tenderness that unraveled her. "I stayed awake all night," he said softly. "Not because of the pain. Because I thought if I closed my eyes, I might lose the chance to tell you what I should have said a long time ago." Clara blinked rapidly, her throat tight. "Damien." His hand closed around hers, firm, steady. "I don't want to pretend anymore. Not at Gallus, not for shareholders, not for the world. I want you, only you." The words cracked her open. Tears welled, spilling before she could stop them. "You can't just say that," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You can't nearly die for me, and then make me believe this is real, when it was supposed to be temporary." His gray eyes locked on hers, unwavering. "It was never temporary for me. I lied to myself, told myself it was strategy, convenience. But every moment with you dismantled that lie. You were never a prop, Clara. You became the only thing in this entire charade that mattered." Clara covered her face with her free hand, a sob escaping. "I thought I ruined everything. I thought you hated me." Damien gently pulled her hand away, tilting her chin so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "I was angry because I cared. I was terrified you would uncover the worst of me and leave. But instead you uncovered the truth. You stayed. Even when I pushed you away, you fought to see who I really was. No one has ever done that for me." Clara shook her head, overwhelmed. "I was reckless. I put myself in danger." His lips curved faintly, though his eyes glistened with something raw. "And I nearly lost my mind thinking of what they would do to you. Clara, if you hadn't been in my life, Victor might have destroyed me entirely. But you gave me reason to fight, to prove myself, to survive." Silence settled thick with emotion, broken only by the soft beeping of the monitor. Clara's tears fell freely now. She leaned closer, her forehead brushing his. "Damien, I don't want to pretend either. I never did. Somewhere between the dances and the late nights and the cereal aisle, I fell in love with you. And I was so afraid you wouldn't want me back." His breath hitched, his hand tightening around hers. "I do," he whispered fiercely. "More than I've ever wanted anything." Their lips met in a kiss that was both desperate and gentle, the kind born not from pretense, but from truth. For the first time there was no audience, no performance, no game. Only them. When they finally pulled apart, Damien rested his forehead against hers, his voice a vow. "No more pretending." Clara smiled through her tears, her heart lighter than it had ever been. "No more pretending," she echoed. In that quiet hospital room, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, they found what neither money nor power nor pretense could ever manufacture: the certainty of love that had survived lies, scandal, and danger, and emerged stronger than either of them had believed possible. A year later, the rolling hills of Napa Valley shimmered beneath the summer sun, the vineyards lush and full, their leaves glowing in the golden light. The grand estate that had once hosted Celeste's wedding was alive again, but this time the celebration was smaller, more intimate, and all eyes were on Clara. She stood at the center of the garden in a gown of ivory silk. She had designed herself elegant in its simplicity, flowing with every breath of wind. A crown of fresh roses rested in her dark hair, her eyes radiant with joy that needed no performance. Guests gathered among the vines, their faces warm and familiar. Family, close friends, people who had stood by them through scandal and triumph. Celeste stood near the front, her smile wide as she watched her twin walk down the aisle. She leaned toward her husband, whispering just loudly enough for Clara to hear. From the forgotten twin at the back of my wedding to the bride of a billionaire. Who would have guessed? Clara laughed softly, shaking her head, though her throat tightened with emotion. At the end of the aisle, Damien waited tall and steady in a tailored suit, his gray eyes fixed on her as though nothing else in the world existed. He looked every bit the powerful man he was yet. In that moment, he was simply hers. When she reached him, he took her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles, in the same quiet gesture that had once steadied her in front of strangers. The officiant's words faded into the background as Damien leaned closer, whispering for her ears alone. This time, Clara Morgan, it's forever. Tears pricked her eyes, her smile breaking as she whispered back, no more pretending. The vows they exchanged were not ornate or rehearsed. They were simple promises spoken from the heart, to trust, to fight for each other, to never let the world's weight crush the bond they had built. When the kiss came, it was not staged, not for cameras or onlookers, but real, a sealing of everything they had endured. Applause rose blending with the rustle of leaves and the soft hum of cicadas in the heat. As the evening descended, lanterns glowed between the vines, and fireworks blossomed above the hills, just as they had on the night Damien first whispered, "Pretend you are with me." But now there was no need for pretense, no shadows of doubt. Clara leaned against Damien's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her, as they watched the sky explode with light. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "Every day," he admitted. "It was the night I stopped living behind walls." She turned to face him, her eyes shining. "And the night I stopped living in someone else's shadow." He kissed her gently, the fireworks painting the sky above them. Around them, laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and love lingered in the air, like the scent of ripe grapes and roses. Clara knew then that their story had begun in pretense, but it had ended in truth. And as she walked hand in hand with Damien through the vineyard, her gown brushing against the grass, she understood that the girl who once sat alone at her sister's wedding had become a woman who would never be alone again. Thank you so much for spending your time with Clara and Damien's journey, a story that began with a whisper at a wedding and grew into a love that could no longer pretend. And if this story touched your heart even a little, I invite you to be part of our community, because here on this channel, every tale is crafted to bring you into a world of emotion, suspense, romance, and hope. And I want you to experience that again and again. So please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that might make you smile, cry, or fall in love with love all over again. And I truly mean it when I say that every comment you leave matters, because I love knowing where in the world you are watching from, whether it is a small town in the Midwest, a bustling city like New York or a quiet countryside in Europe, every place and every voice matters here. So drop a comment right now and let me know where you are joining us from. And if you enjoyed this story, please give it a rating from 0 to 10 in the comments because your feedback helps me shape the next story and keeps me motivated to bring you even more captivating journeys. And if you feel moved to support the channel in a deeper way, you will find a donation link in the description below. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps us create better content, improve production, and continue telling stories that speak to the heart. Because storytelling is not just about entertainment, it is about connection. It is about feeling less alone in a world that sometimes forgets how much we all need a little magic and a little tenderness. So if you want to keep that magic alive with me, please consider supporting. But even if you cannot donate right now, know that just being here, listening, watching, and sharing your thoughts makes you a vital part of this community. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. Because stories are only alive when they are shared, and you make that possible. So as we close this chapter, I invite you to stay tuned for the next one, because there is always another tale waiting around the corner, another character ready to step into your life, another twist to keep you on the edge of your seat, and another love story to remind you why we believe in second chances, in destiny, in courage, and in forever. So please subscribe, comment, like, share, support if you can. And most of all, keep coming back because here you will always find a place where your heart is welcome and your imagination is free to wander. And together we will keep proving that stories can heal, inspire, and connect us no matter where we are in the world.